The intrusion begins. The U.S. Valor drifted silently through the dark void of space, its metal hull reflecting the distant light of a dying star. Inside, the hum of engines filled the corridors as the crew moved through their daily routines. It was supposed to be a quiet patrol, just another routine mission along the outer edge of human space. Captain Elias Carter sat in his command chair, his sharp eyes scanning the holographic display in front of him. He had spent 15 years in the fleet, and he had seen his share of conflicts. Pirates, rogue AI, alien skirmishes, he had dealt with them all. But deep down, something about tonight felt different. Uneasy. First Officer Ramirez, a tall woman with short black hair, walked up beside him. "Captain, all sectors report clear. No activity." Carter nodded, but he didn't relax. "Something's coming," he muttered. "I can feel it." Ramirez raised an eyebrow, but didn't question him. She had served under Carter long enough to know when he trusted his instincts. Suddenly, the ship's AI, Vanguard, interrupted their thoughts with a sharp mechanical voice. "ALERT. Unidentified object detected. Sector 7G. Carter sat up straight. "Bring it on screen." A holographic display flickered, and an image appeared. A massive, unknown warship drifting into human space. Silence fell across the bridge. The ship was black as night, its smooth, unnatural surface reflecting no light. No markings, no signals, nothing that indicated who or what it belonged to. "Is it one of ours?" Ramirez asked. Communications Officer Tanya Ross shook her head. "Negative. No transponder signal, no identification codes." Carter frowned. "Hail them." Ross quickly sent out a transmission. No response. She tried again. Still nothing. Then, the ship moved, slowly, steadily, toward a human colony just a few million kilometers away. "Sir," Ramirez's voice was tense. "That thing is heading straight for Outpost Theta." Carter didn't like this. If it were just an ordinary ship, it would have responded by now. But this vessel, it ignored them completely, like they didn't even exist. "Run a full scan," he ordered. The U.S. Valor's sensors locked onto the unknown warship, scanning its structure, energy output, and composition. But what came back made the crew uneasy. "No life signs," Science Officer Dr. Peddle reported. "No heat signatures. No engine emissions." Carter narrowed his eyes. "That's impossible. Something that big should leave a trail." "It's like it's not even there," Patel muttered. The warship continued its course, moving closer to human space. Then something even stranger happened. The screens flickered. The lights dimmed for a moment. A strange static noise filled the bridge, a low, eerie hum. Vanguard's voice suddenly became distorted. "Warning. Systems failing." Then everything went back to normal. The crew exchanged nervous glances. "What the hell was that?" Ramirez asked. Ross looked at her console. "Sir, the moment the ship entered our sector, all of our scans went haywire. It's jamming us somehow." Carter clenched his jaw. That's not a good sign. The warship was now close enough to see with the naked eye. It had no windows, no thrusters, nothing that made sense. It was just there. Then the alarms blared. "Warning. Energy build-up-TTCT." Carter's stomach twisted. "Is it charging weapons?" Ross checked her console, her face pale. "I don't know. It doesn't have any weapon systems that I can detect, but something inside it is building power." The warship still didn't respond. "Raise shields," Carter ordered. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The U.S. Valor's shields powered up with a faint blue glow. The crew braced themselves. Then, without warning, a massive energy pulse erupted from the warship. The blast swept across the sector, a strange, invisible wave of unknown energy. For a few seconds, everything on the U.S. Valor shut down. No lights, no gravity, no sound. Just darkness. Then, just as quickly, everything powered back on. "Report," Carter barked. Ramirez checked her readings. All systems operational. No damage. "But," she hesitated. Carter turned to her. "But what?" She looked at him, her expression grim. "That energy wave, it wasn't an attack." Carter frowned. "Then what was it?" Ramirez took a deep breath. "A scan. That ship just scanned us, down to the molecular level." Silence fell over the bridge. Ross's voice was shaky. "Sir, we're the ones being observed." Carter's grip tightened on his armrest. He had dealt with threats before. Pirates, hostile aliens, rogue AI. But this was something far worse. He looked back at the unknown warship, still drifting closer to human space, completely unaffected by anything they had done. A cold realization settled over him. "This isn't a simple intrusion," he muttered. "This is an invasion. First contact turns hostile." The bridge of the U.S. Valor remained deathly silent as the unknown warship drifted closer to human space. The eerie black vessel emitted no signals, no transmissions, nothing that indicated its origin or intent. It was like a shadow in space, moving with purpose but without explanation. Captain Elias Carter stood rigid, his eyes locked on the holographic display. The ship had just scanned them, but not in any way known to humanity. It had scanned down to the molecular level, absorbing every bit of data about their ship, their crew, their very existence. "Sir, the warship is accelerating," First Officer Ramirez reported, heading straight for Outpost Theta. Carter's fingers tightened around the armrest of his command chair. Outpost Theta wasn't just a small station. It was a civilian colony. Thousands of people lived there, and if this unknown warship reached them, he wasn't willing to guess what would happen next. "Hail them again," he ordered, his voice firm. Communications Officer Tanya Ross quickly activated the transmission. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of human space. Identify yourself immediately, or we will consider this an act of aggression." Silence. Ross tried again. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the unknown warship's surface began shifting. A strange rippling effect moved across its hull, as though the metal itself was alive. The sensors flickered again, static distorting the displays for a brief moment. Then, a low hum vibrated through the ship, growing louder by the second. "Captain, I'm detecting an energy buildup," Ross shouted. "Something's happening." Carter's heart pounded. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The U.S. Valor's shields flared to life, just as the first attack came. A massive energy beam erupted from the warship's hull, striking straight at the Valor. But instead of a violent explosion, the beam passed through their shields like they weren't even there. For a split second, everything on the U.S. Valor froze. The lights dimmed. The engines flickered. Even the crew felt paralyzed, as if something unseen had passed through their bodies. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Report," Carter barked. Ramirez was already scanning the systems. "No physical damage, sir, but something changed." Ross's hands trembled over her console. "Captain," she swallowed hard. "Our weapons, they're offline." A chill ran down Carter's spine. "What do you mean offline?" Ross shook her head in disbelief. "I mean they're gone. The ship's weapon systems have been completely erased." Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just a hostile act. This warship was disarming them. "Sir," Ramirez's voice cut through the tense air. "The warship is changing course, heading straight for Outpost Theta at full speed." Carter clenched his fists. "Not on my watch." He turned to the helm. "Prepare for pursuit. Full speed ahead. If we can't fire at it, we'll block its path ourselves." The U.S. Valor surged forward, engines roaring, pushing against the unknown warship's trajectory. They had no weapons, no way to fight back, but Carter wasn't going to stand by and watch thousands of civilians get wiped out. Then, Just as they got close, the warship vanished. Not through hyperspace, not through a jump drive. It simply blinked out of existence. Gasps filled the bridge. The crew stared in shock at the empty void where the warship had been just seconds ago. Carter's hands gripped the console. His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. Then Ross's voice trembled as she pointed at her screen. "Captain, I'm picking up a transmission." Carter turned to her sharply. "From who?" Ross looked pale. "From them." Silence fell over the bridge. Everyone turned toward the speakers as the mysterious transmission crackled to life. A voice, distorted and alien, spoke in a language never heard before, but somehow the ship's translation AI processed it instantly. Observation complete. Adaptation successful. Then the ship's warning systems blared to life once again. Alert. Sector-wide distortion, DDTCTED. Multiple Sigin-HURES AP Prorocheing. Carter's blood ran cold. It wasn't just one warship anymore. More were coming. The hidden message. The bridge of the U.S. Valor was bathed in an eerie red glow as emergency alerts flashed across every console. The warship, the thing that had stripped them of their weapons and vanished like a ghost, was gone. But something far worse had just appeared on their scanners. Multiple unknown signatures were approaching. Captain Elias Carter leaned forward in his chair, his jaw clenched tight. "How many?" First Officer Ramirez stared at the display, her face pale. "At least 5. No, wait, 10. Her voice trailed off as the readings kept increasing. Communications Officer Tanya Ross swallowed hard. "Captain, I think." She hesitated. "I think we just got their attention." A deep, uneasy silence settled over the bridge. The first ship had observed them, had disabled them, and then had called for reinforcements. Carter took a slow breath, forcing his mind to stay sharp. Fear wouldn't save them. Thinking would. "Any sign of transmissions between these ships?" he asked. Ross quickly scanned the data. No standard signals, but her fingers froze on the controls. "Wait, there is something." The crew turned toward her as she expanded the waveforms on her screen. At first, it looked like nothing but random pulses of static, but then a pattern emerged. Dr. Patel, the ship's lead scientist, stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. "That's not static. That's a transmission buried inside their energy emissions." A chill ran down Carter's spine. They weren't just here to invade. They were talking. "Can we translate it?" Carter asked. Ross hesitated. "Our AI is already running decryption, but it's not a language, sir. It's something else. A code. A signal. Maybe both." Carter turned toward Patel. "What do they want?" Patel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he manipulated the data, filtering out the background interference. Slowly, a message took shape. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Observe. Assess. Report." The words sent a ripple of dread through the crew. Ramirez's hands curled into fists. "They're not attacking. They're learning." Carter exhaled sharply. That was worse than an outright assault. These things, whatever they were, didn't just show up to destroy. They studied their targets. They adapted. And once they learned enough, they would strike. A sudden beep interrupted his thoughts. Ross's console flashed with new data. "Captain, we're being scanned again." Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. "By what?" She turned, her face stricken. "By all of them." A new wave of static filled the speakers. But this time, it wasn't just noise. A voice, cold, distorted, and inhuman, cut through the ship's systems. Observation nearing completion. Adaptation in progress. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. The ship's gravity wavered for a split second, like reality itself was bending around them. Then the transmission ended. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady hum of the ship's systems struggling to stabilize. Ramirez was the first to break the silence. "Sir, I don't think we're dealing with just ships." Carter turned to her, his voice low. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "I think we're looking at something else entirely. Something that doesn't fight like us, doesn't communicate like us. This isn't just technology. It's intelligence, one that learns, one that evolves." Asterisk, asterisk. Carter didn't respond immediately. His gaze locked onto the starfield beyond the viewport, where the distant shadows of the approaching warships grew larger by the second. If Ramirez was right, if these things were not just machines, but something more, something alive, then humanity wasn't just facing an invasion. They were facing extinction, a desperate plan. The bridge of the U.S. Valor felt suffocating, thick with tension. Every display screen pulsed with red warning signals, flashing like silent screens. The unknown warships were no longer distant threats on a monitor. They were here. Captain Elias Carter stood at the center of the chaos, his hands clenched into fists. His ship had been disarmed, his crew studied, and now the real battle was about to begin. "Status," he demanded. First Officer Ramirez spoke quickly, her voice tight. "Enemy ships are surrounding us. No visible weapons, but they're forming a blockade between us and Outpost Theta." Communications Officer Tanya Ross barely looked up from her console. "They're transmitting again, sir, but it's different this time." Carter narrowed his eyes. "Different how?" Ross took a breath. "Before, they were just observing. Now, they're signaling something else." She hesitated. "I think they're waiting." Waiting. The word sent a cold ripple through the room. These warships had disabled them without firing a single shot. They could have destroyed the Valor by now. But they didn't. Why? Carter's mind raced. These beings weren't attacking like any enemy he had ever faced. They were playing a different game, one where humanity was already at a disadvantage. Dr. Patel, the ship's scientist, turned from his station, eyes filled with realization. "They're testing us, Captain." Carter looked at him sharply. "Testing us for what?" Patel's fingers hovered over his console. "I think they want to see what we do next." That was it. That's why they hadn't killed them yet. These warships weren't just machines. They were designed to learn, to adapt, to evolve. They had taken away the Valor's weapons. Now, they were waiting to see if humans would find another way to fight. Carter's mind locked onto a single thought. "We have one shot at this. One chance to prove we're not just prey." His eyes flicked to Chief Engineer Derek Huang, the best damn problem solver on the ship. "Derek, I need a way to hit them." Huang blinked. "Sir, we have no weapons." "Then we make one." Silence. Then, understanding flashed in Huang's eyes. He nodded sharply. "We can overload the reactor core, create a high-energy EMP blast." Ramirez turned, alarmed. "That could fry our own systems, Captain." "It's a risk," Carter said. "But if we don't try, we're dead anyway." Ramirez exhaled. Then she nodded. "Let's do it." Carter turned to Huang. "How long?" Huang was already running calculations. 5 minutes, but we need to be close, inside their formation. Carter clenched his jaw. "Then we go straight at them." He turned to his helm officer. "Full power. Take us right into their blockade." The order should have sounded like suicide. But here, now, it was their only chance to fight back. The U.S. Valor roared forward, engines flaring. The unknown warships reacted instantly, shifting position, but they still didn't fire. They were waiting, still learning. Not for long. Huang's voice cut through the noise. "EMP is charging. 3 minutes." Carter's grip tightened. "Hold steady. Get us closer." The unknown warships moved like predators, adjusting in perfect synchronization, tracking their every move. Then, a sudden ripple of energy pulsed across space. Ross gasped. "Captain, they're adapting again." Carter's blood ran cold. They had figured out the plan. But it was too late. Wang's voice rang through the bridge. "EMP ready." Carter's eyes locked onto the largest enemy warship ahead. "Do it." Wang slammed the controls. The U.S. Valor's reactor detonated in a controlled explosion, unleashing a wave of pure electromagnetic force. The blast swept across the sector, crashing into the enemy warships. For the first time since this nightmare began, they flickered. Their smooth black hulls rippled like disturbed water. Their strange energy fields collapsed. Then, they stopped moving. Silence. Carter held his breath. Had they won? Then, one by one, the warships began to reactivate. Only this time, they were different. The reckless gamble. The U.S. Valor floated in the eerie silence of space, its reactor cooling down from the massive EMP blast it had just unleashed. For a moment, just a moment, the enemy warships had stopped moving. The bridge crew held their breath, eyes locked on the lifeless black vessels that surrounded them. Had the plan worked? Had they finally disabled these things? Then, the first warship twitched. A slow, unnatural movement, like something waking from a deep sleep. Then another, and another. One by one, the unknown warships reactivated. But they were not the same anymore. Their black surfaces shimmered, as if shifting into something stronger. Captain Elias Carter's stomach twisted. The EMP had hit them, but instead of disabling them, it had triggered something else. They had adapted. "Sir," Ramirez's voice was tight, her hands gripping the edge of her console. Their energy signatures just spiked. They're running at twice their original power levels. Twice. The EMP was supposed to shut them down. Instead, it made them stronger. Carter's mind raced. We just accelerated their evolution. Ross's voice shook. "Captain, new transmission incoming." Carter forced himself to stay steady. "Put it through." A cold, distorted voice filled the bridge. "Adaptation complete. New parameters established." The message was different this time. Before, they had simply been observing, studying. Now, they were responding. Patil's voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain, I think we just became the test." Carter exhaled sharply. "What do you mean?" Patil's fingers hovered over the readings. "I don't think they were ever here to destroy us outright. They were evolving through us. The more we fight, the stronger they get. Our resistance is feeding their progress." The realization hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't a war. It was an experiment. A low hum filled the ship, growing louder. The enemy warships were moving again. Only this time, they weren't advancing toward Outpost Theta. They were closing in on the U.S. Valor. Their priority had changed. The humans were now the primary subject of interest. Carter straightened, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Full power to engines. Get us out of here, now." The ship's thrusters roared to life, but the unknown warships matched their every move. Faster, smoother. They weren't just tracking them. They were mirroring them. Ramirez slammed her fist against the console. "Damn it. They're copying our flight patterns in real time." Ross's hands flew over her controls. "They're transmitting again, Captain. They're—" She trailed off, eyes going wide. Carter turned to her. What are they doing?" She swallowed hard. "They're learning how to speak." The audio feed crackled, then shifted. And this time, it wasn't an alien voice that responded. It was a perfect replica of Captain Carter's own voice. Elias Carter, human, commanding officer, U.S. Valor, species, adapting. A cold chill ran down Carter's spine. They had just spoken his name. They had just identified his species. They weren't just studying anymore. They were preparing. The final stand. The U.S. Valor raced through the dark void of space, its engines roaring at maximum output. But no matter how fast they moved, The enemy warships matched their speed exactly. A perfect shadow, mirroring every turn, every maneuver. They weren't just chasing anymore. They were learning. Captain Elias Carter stood frozen, his heart hammering as the eerie transmission echoed through the bridge. Elias Carter, human, commanding officer, U.S. Valor, species, adapting. The voice was his own, replicated flawlessly by whatever intelligence controlled these ships. First Officer Ramirez's voice was sharp with fear. "Sir, they're talking now." Ross, her face pale, stared at her screen. "Captain, I think they just processed our entire language in seconds." Carter's stomach twisted. It took humans centuries to decode alien dialects. These things did it in moments. And worse, they weren't just speaking. They were thinking. Carter forced himself to stay focused. Panic wouldn't save them, but strategy might. "Are reinforcements still inbound?" he asked. Ramirez checked the long-range scans. "Yes, sir. Human Command Fleet ETA. 6 minutes." 6 minutes. That might as well be an eternity. The enemy warships had already evolved beyond their initial forms. If they kept adapting, by the time reinforcements arrived, humanity might already be outmatched. They had to act. Now, a last-ditch effort. Carter turned to Chief Engineer Derek Huang. "Derek, tell me you have something. Anything." Huang wiped sweat from his brow. "I've got a theory, but you're not gonna like it." "I already don't like it," Carter snapped. "Spit it out." Huang tapped on his console, bringing up a simulation of the enemy ships. "These things adapt when they detect a threat, right?" he said. "Our EMP made them stronger. Our escape attempt made them faster." Carter nodded. "So what's the play?" Huang exhaled. "We make them think we're useless." Silence. Ramirez frowned. "You want us to, what? Surrender?" Huang shook his head. "No. I want us to break the pattern." He pointed at the simulation. "They're learning based on how we fight back. But what if we stop giving them anything to learn?" Carter understood instantly. "You're saying, we go dead." Huang nodded. "No shields, no weapons, no movement. We make the ship go dark, like a floating piece of space junk. They're expecting resistance. What happens if we give them nothing?" Carter's mind raced. It was a gamble. If the enemy saw the Valor as a worthless subject, they might ignore it. Or they might destroy them outright. But doing nothing was the only move they hadn't tried. He had no better options. Carter turned to his crew. "Cut main power. Shut everything down except life support." Huang hesitated. "Captain, if we do this, we're sitting ducks." Carter's voice was firm. "Do it." The order was carried out in seconds. The U.S. Valor went dark. A dead ship in the void. The engine stopped burning. The hum of the ship's reactor faded to silence. On the outside, the U.S. Valor looked dead, just another empty wreck drifting in space. Carter held his breath. The unknown warships stopped moving. They didn't advance, didn't fire. They simply watched. Ramirez's whisper broke the silence. "It's working." Ross clutched her console, eyes wide. "Captain, enemy transmissions just dropped to 0. For the first time since the encounter began, the alien warships weren't trying to analyze or adapt. They were confused." The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Then, without warning, the warships began to pull back. One by one, they turned and vanished into the void. "Gone." Carter exhaled, finally allowing himself to breathe. They had won, but not by fighting. By breaking the cycle. Ramirez let out a shaky laugh. "I can't believe that worked." Ross was still staring at the scanners. "Sir." Carter turned to her. "What?" She hesitated. Then her voice came out quiet. "They left, but they didn't retreat." Carter frowned. "Explain." Ross's fingers trembled over her screen. Their signals. They weren't moving away in fear. She swallowed. They just lost interest. Carter's blood ran cold. This wasn't over. The enemy hadn't been beaten. They had simply decided. Humanity wasn't worth their time. For now, the ominous warning. The U.S. Valor drifted in silence, a lone shadow against the endless void. The enemy warships had vanished, leaving nothing behind. No wreckage, no signals, no trace that they had ever been there. But Captain Elias Carter knew better. This wasn't a victory. It was a warning. He stood at the bridge, staring at the empty sector where the unknown warships had been. They had studied him, adapted to him, spoken his name in his own voice. And then they had left. Not because they were defeated, because they had decided he wasn't a threat. Carter's grip tightened on the console. That was worse than any battle. A deep unease settled over the crew. No one cheered. No one relaxed. They all felt it. This wasn't over. The message left behind. Communications Officer Tanya Ross hesitated before speaking. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange." Carter turned. "More enemy signals?" She shook her head, confusion in her eyes. "No, sir. It's a transmission, but it's coming from us." A cold ripple of fear crawled up Carter's spine. "Explain." Ross's hands moved quickly over her console. "It's a signal originating from our ship, but we're not sending it." That didn't make sense. Carter moved closer. "Are you saying the enemy left something behind?" Ross nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. And it's transmitting out into deep space." Carter exhaled sharply. "Put it on screen." A waveform appeared, smooth, structured, too precise to be random noise. Then the translation AI kicked in. A single message, repeating over and over. "Observation complete. Subject deemed non-threatening. Awaiting further instructions." Silence filled the bridge. Ramirez whispered first. "They sent a report." Ross nodded. "They marked us. They sent a signal back to something. Someone." The realization settled like ice in Carter's chest. The warships weren't autonomous invaders. They had masters. And now, those masters knew everything about humanity. The shadows beyond the stars. Dr. Patel turned from his station, his face pale. "Captain, I just ran long-range scans. I found something." Carter turned to him, already dreading the answer. "What is it?" Patel hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled up a star map. A region of space far beyond human borders was highlighted. It pulsed with strange, unreadable energy. A signal source. A beacon. Carter's voice was low. "That's where the transmission went, isn't it?" Patel nodded. "Yes, sir. And that's not the worst part." He tapped the console, zooming in on the distant sector. "We're not the first ones they've observed." Asterisk, asterisk. The map expanded. Dozens of signals appeared, scattered across space, from different star systems, different civilizations. All of them marked. All of them labeled with the same chilling words. Non-threatening. Ramirez swallowed. "You mean they've done this before?" Patel nodded. "To countless others." Carter's fists clenched. And if all these species were deemed non-threatening, he turned back to Patel. "Where are they now?" Patel hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Gone." The truth no one wants to hear. A heavy silence filled the bridge. Ross's voice was barely steady. "Captain, what do we do?" Carter exhaled, his mind running through every possibility. Human command needed to know. The entire galaxy needed to know. Because this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was the beginning of something bigger. The real threat wasn't just the warships. It was who sent them. And they hadn't even arrived yet. Carter's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "We warn everyone." He turned toward Ramirez. "Set course for human command. Maximum speed. If they think we're non-threatening, fine. We'll make sure they regret it. The U.S. Valor's engines ignited, burning brighter than ever as the ship turned toward home. Because this wasn't over. It had only just begun. The end.